Hello everyone. Welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Stephen Yissil. Today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Chicago film industry, and this is reading today will be from Flickering Empire. And we are covering Chapter 7 of the Edison Trust. So I have a comprehensive slideshow here for you all to enjoy while we go through this reading. So I hope you enjoy it. We will get started right away. Hey Jason, good to see you. Okay, Chapter 7, the Edison Trust. George Spohr and Gilbert Anderson were getting their company underway during a particularly tumultuous time in the motion picture industry. There were so many lawsuits and countersuits filed during 1907 and 1908 that the entire movie business was plunged into chaos. The American film industry in the northeastern United States was already stunted by the many patent lawsuits Thomas Edison had filed. He had been suing people and companies going back to the 1890s. The most important studio apart from Edison Manufacturing and Vitagraph, operating in the New York, New Jersey area in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, was W.K.L. Dixon's American Mutoscope and Biograph Company. Dixon, a thorn in Edison's side, ever since he had defected from his former employer years earlier, had gotten around Edison's patents by using 68mm film, nearly twice the size of Edison's 35mm film, and his cameras used friction feed instead of Edison's patented sprocket feed to run the film past the aperture. Although the Chicago filmmakers had fared better than their northeastern counterparts because geographically they were farther away from the Wizard of Menlo Park, Edison's litigation with them, which had been relentless since 1902, was beginning to take its toll. Soon, Selig Polyscope, S&A, and the Kalem Company, a new company co-founded by Distribution Against George Klein, along with a couple of other major studios, Path Frères and Vitagraph, approached Edison about devising a licensing system that would end the litigation permanently and satisfactorily for all parties involved. The legal wrangling dragged on for months as the various plans were bandied about, including one for a system whereby motion picture manufacturers would make royalty payments to Edison of $5 per week. Thomas Armat had initially proposed this plan, then balked when he realized that Edison wanted more money. During these discussions, the Méliès Manufacturing Company and the Lubin Manufacturing Company were also invited to join the potential merger. Sigmund Lubin, reportedly the most notorious of all when it came to piracy, was asked to, quote, enter and behave himself, unquote, by Edison's lawyers. The licensing system was first legally put into place at the beginning of 1908. According to a Chicago Daily Tribune article from February 11th, quote, in addition to the manufacturing and show places, the combination will control what is termed 100 rental places where films are leased. A complete understanding has been reached, and in lieu of the settlement of legal battles in which he has indulged with the manufacturers, Mr. Edison will receive from the combination $200,000 per year royalty, in return for which he is to permit no other concerns to use any of his patents, without which films cannot be made. End quote. The phrase "no other concerns" must have sounded intimidating to aspiring independent motion picture producers, or those that were already established like Biograph, which were not named in the agreement. Indeed, the licensing system had also been an overt attempt on Edison's part to freeze his chief rivals at Biograph out of the market by not naming them as licensees. Biograph responded by purchasing at an auction held by the Anthony Scoville Company a patent to the, quote, Latham film loop, end quote. This loop was a device that, ironically, W.K.L. Dixon had co-invented in 1895 and that was now a standard feature on all motion picture cameras and projectors. Biograph then served injunctions against all the Edison-affiliated companies for violating their patent. Edison predictably countersued in an attempt to gain control of a patent that he claimed should be rightfully his. For once, a federal court ruled against him. Edison also sued George Klein, his old on-again, off-again nemesis, in May 1908. Although Klein had just co-founded Calum, like S&A, the company was named after the first initials of the last names of the founders, Klein, Samuel Long, and Frank J. Marion. Calum, KLM. He actually sold his shares in the company at a significant profit before it entered into the Edison agreement. Klein, as an importer-distributor of European films, had rejected Edison's offer of a license. Earlier, Klein did negotiate with Edison's lawyers, but he was put off by their insistence that no new applicants would be granted licenses. Klein then joined Thomas Armat and Biograph in waging a public relations war by placing advertisements about the dangers of an Edison Trust in numerous motion picture magazines and in the Chicago Daily Tribune, though eventually Klein, Armat, and the Biograph would all reluctantly join such a trust. When the Daily Tribune covered the Edison-Klein suit, it reflected popular opinion in overstating Edison's role in inventing motion pictures, and thereby also implied that his lawsuits were well-founded and that countering them was futile. Quote, the art of reproducing motion by photography was invented and to a large extent made commercially possible by Edison. Patents were granted to him covering first the camera used for getting the pictures and second the motion picture film as a new product. These patents expire in August 1914. The present suit is based on infringements. End quote. With a federal court upholding Biograph's patent on the Latham loop, Edison was now left with no recourse but to negotiate with his rival studio about including it in a new licensing agreement. This new organization, officially founded in December 1908, would be known as the Motion Picture Patents Company, also known as the MPPC, or informally as the, quote, Edison Trust. In addition to controlling the production of motion pictures, the MPPC also attempted to corner the market on the production of the film stock on which motion pictures were shot. Eastman Kodak, the dominant manufacturer of raw 35mm stock, joined the trust by agreeing to sell its product only to licensed studios. Because of these policies, the MPPC would rule the American film industry with an iron fist for the next 7 years, during which time Chicago solidified its standing as the country's movie capital. The merger between Biograph and Edison's interests were based on a 4-page document drafted by both parties at a closed-door meeting in May 1908, a meeting that they would deny took place at future antitrust trials. Titled, quote, "A Plan to Reorganize the Motion Picture Business of the United States," end quote, this document outlines how ruthless the MPPC, referred to in the document as Corporation X, intended to be, and attempting to rigorously control every aspect of the movie business: production, distribution, and exhibition. So there's also, so we're going to be reading some of what was in this document here. Manufacturers will pay to the Edison and Biograph interests half-cent per foot royalty on all films marketed in the United States. Exhibitors will pay to the same interests a royalty running from $1 to $5 weekly for each motion picture projecting machine in use by them, the amount to be based upon the seating capacity of the exhibitor's theater. A corporation is to be formed, which we will call X, as capital stock Y. The business of Corporation X will be the renting of films, sale of machines, and other items usual in the trade. Manufacturers will sell exclusively to Corporation X. Corporation X will buy films from the manufacturers only. Corporation X will rent films and is not to sell them. Corporation X will not buy films from any manufacturer who does not maintain the conditions agreed to. The board of directors of Corporation X is to be composed of one representative of each manufacturer. The board of directors will determine upon the cities of the United States which have been active in the film rental business and select from existing rental exchanges in each city 1 to 3 which are to receive an offer of purchase as hereinafter provided, these to be thereafter maintained as rental offices to Corporation X. The total number of agencies so selected is not to exceed 50 in the United States. No fixed rental prices are to be established. No theater will be forced to pay a sum for film rental which is oppressive, the elastic scale acting in favor of those that need consideration. Theater owners engaged in evil practices can be disciplined. Films can be withdrawn from the market when their condition becomes bad. A notice then appeared in the January 23, 1909 edition of the Moving Picture World that formally announced the formation of the MPPC. It was an open letter addressed, quote, "to the exhibitors of motion pictures," unquote. And here's the following letter. The Motion Picture Patents Company has acquired the Edison, Biograph, Armat, and Vitograph patents, which patents, we are assured by counsel, cover all modern moving picture films and all existing commercial types of projecting machines. The Patents Company has licensed the following manufacturers and importers whose present output is 18 reels per week: American Mutoscope and Biograph Company, Edison Manufacturing Company, S&A Film Manufacturing Company, Kalem Company, George Klein, Lubin Manufacturing Company, Pathé Frères, Selig Polyscope Company, and Vitograph Company of America. The letter went on to name all of the currently licensed film exchanges across the United States and urged exhibitors to apply for a license before February 1st. It was also stated that any motion picture manufacturer other than the 9 named were operating in violation of MPPC patents, and that any exhibitor or exchange that handled quote, infringing films, unquote, would be liable to suit for injunction and damages. So we do have a photograph here of Edison in the book, and it says, Thomas Edison in Chicago in 1912, 1 year before the Motion Picture Patents Corporation was sued by the United States Justice Department for violating antitrust laws. And this is from the Chicago Daily News, and the photo is courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. I'm not sure if this is in the slideshow or not. It very well could be. All right, continuing on. Enforcement in Chicago of trust policies was swift. Immediately after the notice appeared in Moving Picture World, quote, licensed officers, end quote, from every police precinct visited all of the city's Nickelodeons to determine whether or not they had complied with the law requiring theater operators to be officially licensed by Edison. At the same time, the MPPC sent out a circular to all of Chicago's film exchanges, demanding that they sign a new agreement refusing to distribute to these theaters any films that had not been officially licensed under Edison's patents. Max Lewis, president of the Chicago Film Exchange, one of the largest and earliest local distributors, refused to comply and publicly complained that the MPPC was acting in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Unfortunately for the independents, Lewis's resistance was short-lived. The Chicago Film Exchange's license was canceled after Lewis became embroiled in an unrelated business scandal later in 1909. The Edison Trust also allegedly resorted to hiring thugs with mob connections, the notorious, quote, goon squad, end quote, to enforce MPPC policy. According to Chicago filmmaker and writer William Grisham, quote, goon tactics were employed to break the backs of competition. Equipment and films were destroyed, property wrecked, lives threatened, end quote. The trust also exerted pressure on its own licensed studios, which were required to meet a production quota. 2 one-reel films per week for the bigger companies and a single one-reeler per week for the smaller ones, to ensure that a steady supply of product would reach licensed theaters. While the Chicago studios saw an explosion of growth in 1908 and had no trouble meeting their quotas, New York-based Biograph, by contrast, initially struggled. Biograph had only a single director, Wallace McCutcheon, under contract. When McCutcheon became seriously ill in mid-1908, D.W. Griffith, then an undistinguished actor and playwright, replaced him. Griffith would be the sole Biograph director through 1910, during which time he would hone his impressive talents, directing literally hundreds of pictures, almost single-handedly turning around his employer's fortunes in the process. While touring Europe in 1909, Colonel Selig granted an interview to a British movie magazine in which he defended the trust by essentially denying that it was a trust, while simultaneously denigrating the shoddy production methods of its independent American rivals. Quote, well, unquote, Selig said, quote, the independents can't stand up against the patents company, who have made enormous strides and are now doing better than ever because they have command of the best films. The fact is the independents are financed by the International Projecting Company, who may know something about finance but nothing about films. The patents company was never a trust and never meant to be. It was simply a business measure of protection and self-help to uphold their patents, end quote. The finance company to which Selig refers was actually named the International Projecting and Producing Company, also known as IPPC, and it was a Chicago-based coalition of independents that announced its formation with an impressive capital of $2 million in the February 6, 1909 edition of Show World. The mastermind behind this operation was J.J. Murdoch, the general manager of the Western Vaudeville Managers Association. The founding of this coalition inaugurated a bitter war between independents and the trust that would last for years. Although the United States Justice Department would eventually force the Edison Trust to dissolve for the very violations cited by Max Lewis, some of the MPPC's policies were in fact highly innovative and beneficial to the film industry. Prior to 1908, foreign films dominated the American market. Once American manufacturers were licensed, they dramatically increased their pace of production in a period of intense competition both with each other and with foreign manufacturers. This dramatic increase in product led directly to a golden age for studios such as S&A and Selig Polyscope. More important, the MPPC established a uniform rental space for all licensed motion pictures. This fixed tariff meant that no studio could undercut any other by offering lower-priced films to distributors. Going forward, what would differentiate the movies of the big studios would no longer be cost, but quality. In turn, the major studios each forged a distinctive, quote, house style, end quote. For example, S&A became known primarily for comedies and westerns, Selig Polyscope for period pieces and, quote, jungle adventure, end quote, films, and etc. Finally, the MPPC provided fire and accident insurance for all of its licensed theaters, a progressive move that was considered, quote, remarkable, end quote, in 1909. The Trust's policies also helped to change the way motion pictures were perceived in the broader culture. The MPPC's replacement of the sale of films with a strictly enforced rental policy, which still exists to this day, brought an end to the exhibition of old and damaged prints. This innovation guaranteed audiences a higher quality movie-going experience than that to which they had been accustomed. To help transform the reputation of movies from that of a low-class novelty to a respectable leisure time activity, the MPPC also instituted a policy of systematically renovating all of its licensed theaters to, quote, end the day of the dingy motion picture room, end quote. Additionally, the MPPC joined forces with the newly formed National Board of Censorship and agreed to produce pictures that were, quote, educational, moral, and cleanly amusing, end quote. The rehabilitation of the image of motion pictures was now nearly complete. This newly respectable image of the movies, coupled with the increased rate of production, meant that the U.S. motion picture industry began to grow dramatically. In a span of just 4 years, the number of movie theaters across the country more than doubled, from approximately 6,500 theaters in 1909 to more than 15,000 theaters in 1913. Unfortunately for the MPPC, unlicensed independent theaters, which accounted for the majority of the movie houses in the country beginning in 1911, managed to get a hold of and exhibit licensed films. This flaw in its plan led to the Edison Trust to form a new company, the General Film Company, also known as the GFC, the purpose of which was to purchase film exchanges in an attempt to, quote, cut out the middlemen, end quote, and control distribution for themselves. As with the MPPC, the formation of the General Film Company was outlined in a 3-page document almost ominously titled, quote, details of a plan under which licensed manufacturers and importers will take over the licensed rental business of the United States, end quote. This blueprint was first presented to MPPC leadership at another closed-door meeting, and the General Film Company was first officially announced in mid-April 1910. Just as Thomas Edison was not single-handedly responsible for most of the inventions credited to him, however, neither was he the sole force behind the MPPC or the GFC. The Edison Trust was the brainchild of many individual minds. The president of the General Film Company, for instance, was Frank Dyer, who began his career as an Edison patent attorney in the 1890s, but whose responsibilities had exponentially increased over the years. Although all of the members of the MPPC appeared to be publicly loyal, its individual members sometimes drastically differed in their attitudes. George Spohr and Gilbert Anderson had eagerly joined the trust and its affiliates, while George Klein and William Selig, pronouncements and interviews to the contrary, had been more reluctant. Some film people felt that while the MPPC had initially spurred a healthy sense of competition among the studios, membership made them increasingly complacent as time went by. Charlie Chaplin, for instance, thought that SNA's membership in the trust gave it a false sense of security and eventually led to a lack of concern about the quality of its output. Selig, on the other hand, had become increasingly interested in innovation, as evidenced by his production of cliffhanger serials, longer format films, and experiments with sound and extensive color tinting. Privately, the Colonel was frustrated by the Trust's regulation of the form and content of the pictures it distributed, in particular by its initial, inflexible rule of distributing only one-reelers, i.e. movies that ran no more than 17 minutes in length. By merging its production and distribution companies, a merger that would provide the model for the Hollywood, quote, studio system, end quote, of the 1920s through the 1950s, the MPPC had successfully increased its monopoly over the industry. Although many film historians have, with some justification, negatively portrayed the Edison Trust as a repressive institution, its achievements in both stabilizing and helping the fledgling movie industry grow should be acknowledged. The Motion Picture Patents Company and General Film Company invented the template that would eventually be explicitly followed by the next generation of studio moguls in Hollywood's beloved Golden Age. The moguls of MGM, Paramount, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and RKO would go even further with their monopoly by also vertically integrating exhibition when they established their own movie theater chains. That's it for today. That is the end of part 2 of this book. That was real quick today. So next week will be part 3. We'll be starting this, and it's the golden age of Chicago film production. And we'll be starting with chapter 8 next week, the golden age of SNA. And yeah, there's some more photographs in this chapter. I'm actually surprised by how short this one was today. But yes, so we're done with part 2 of this book. I hope you all are enjoying this so far. I really hope. And if you have any suggestions on what I could improve with this series, please let me know. So, this is it for today, and until the next one, class dismissed.